All righty, welcome everyone. Hard to believe it's the middle of November already. But thanks for joining us. We're really looking forward to today with Robert presenting some of his expertise and knowledge as we go along. We'll just work through a couple housekeeping items. So number one, this call is recorded. If you don't want your video on, feel free to turn it off. Otherwise, keep your fabulous faces on the screen, join in, ask questions, and then the recording will be available on the Doug YouTube channel, Meetup channel afterwards. We'll post in the Meetup group when it's available. So today, Madison's going to go through an intro of Doug, then Robert will take it away with his presentation for us on Copilot powered Scrum. So as always, user groups are about connection. So use the chat to engage. Feel free to come off mute and ask any questions, and share your profile on LinkedIn so we can connect and stay connected throughout. Just some quick housekeeping items. If you're not speaking, please go on mute. Just the background distraction, we'll keep it to a minimum. And then, of course, courteous, respectful interaction. If you haven't already, join our Meetup group to stay connected, and that's where you'll get notices on other events that are happening within the group. Next month, mark your calendars, December 11th, Ashley Steiner will be joining us for survival tips for CRM admins. I love the title, Real World Tips to Stay Sane and Succeed. So that should be a good one. And then we're looking for some speakers for the new year. So if you have anything you'd like to share, any ideas on what you would like presented, let us know using this form, and we will reach out to you if you're wanting to speak, or if there's a subject you'd like to learn more about, let us know and we'll try to source the speaker for that. And then just quickly, some other groups on the Meetup platform. You can certainly search and find different groups, whether they're in person or virtual communities to join. Madison, your turn.
All right. Well, looks like Diane covered a good bit of it, so I'll try and go quickly so we can get to our speaker. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Madison Han. I am the meeting and events manager here at Doug. So I help run all of our local meetup programs as well as our regional events. So big events person over here. We have tons of them at Doug. So just here to tell you a little bit about Doug, kind of what all we offer, and help share some upcoming things with you. So who is Doug? Doug is a free community for users, implementers, and resellers of Microsoft business applications. We mainly support Microsoft Dynamics 365, GP, Power Platform, and AI. And we're here to give you the tools to excel and grow in your personal and professional careers. Go to the next slide, Diane. Basically, I have it memorized at this point. So it looks like Diane pretty much already went over the rules of engagement, but we just ask that, please keep sales pitches out of this. We really want this to be an educational opportunity for people and not for people to be sold a product. So just make sure that you participate with your speaker and don't try to have any sales pitches. Go to the next one. So we have multiple different programs here at Doug. We have online open discussion forums where you can ask questions about a specific product and the community will help answer. We have some conferences, which I'll get into in a minute. We also have local meetups like this one. We have some in person, some virtually. So if you're ever curious just to see what some other groups are talking about, feel free to join one in your local area or join any of our virtual meetups online. If you can't make a virtual meetup, you can check out our YouTube channel where you can find all of the virtual recordings of our meetups on our YouTube channel. So great way to see what's going on around the world. And you can go to the next slide. So one of our main conferences that we have coming up, we're partnering with Microsoft to bring back Convergence. I'm sure a few of you have probably heard of Convergence before if you've been around for a while. So again, we're partnering with Microsoft to bring this back. It'll focus on AI and D365, and it will be December 9th through the 12th in Miami. So coming up very soon. Our team is super busy planning all of this. You can scan the QR code to get your ticket now. It is almost sold out. I think I just checked and we have 29 tickets left. So if you were interested in coming, please get your ticket. Probably by today or tomorrow, it will be fully sold out. So make sure to get that ticket if you're interested. And next up, we have DynamicsCon. So this is our 2026 DynamicsCon happening May 12th through the 15th in Las Vegas. This is community run by the Doug community. And it is a great way to get lots of education and networking. So again, community run, we really try and listen to what you guys want to hear and bring that content to this conference. We have over 300 speakers coming, and we have our early bird pricing going on right now for $9.99, and that discount ends December 31st. So make sure to get your tickets soon for that, and we hope to see you in Vegas. And oh, I totally forgot to add a slide for this, but on that note, call for speakers also just opened for DynamicsCon. So I know a lot of you like to speak at conferences. So if you're interested, please try and sign up for our call for speakers. It's on our website. I'll also send the link in the chat in a minute as well. But we are always looking for new speakers. So even if you have never spoken before, please don't let that stop you from applying. We have our 2026 DynamicsCon regionals announced. So these are a little bit smaller in scope than our big conferences like DynamicsCon, but a little bit bigger than our local meetups like this one. So they're usually about 150 to 300 people, and we try to go to local regions around the world. These are full day to 2-day events, and these are focused on almost all products except for some specific occurrences. So we're going to Tampa, Florida, January 14th. We are going to the Pacific Northwest in Vancouver, March 20th. We're partnering with Canadian Power Platform Summit. This is right also this is right before MVP Summit as well. So we encourage lots of MVPs to come if you're going to be over there. We are going to Denver, Colorado in April, Toronto for all of you folks that are in Toronto in June. We'll have set dates on that soon. We're just waiting to confirm with the Microsoft office, but we'll be at the Microsoft office there in Toronto. And then you can go to the next slide. We're going to Accra, Ghana in July, Columbus, Ohio in August, Montreal for if we have any folks joining from Montreal, we're going there in September, Germany in October, and Houston, Texas in November. So very busy schedule. We're super excited to have these announced. And if anybody's interested in sponsoring as well, we have our sponsorship prospectus out and available. So please send me a message and I'll get you in contact with our sponsorship people if you were interested. And I think that's the last slide. Yes, awesome. I'll pass it back over to Diane. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Madison. Okay, Robert, you are up. Thank you for joining us. Copilot powered Scrum, sure to be a good one. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. Let me get my screen sharing going here. On the agenda, it says I didn't have to be prepared until 1:30, so I'm not done my slides yet. I'm just kidding. All right, here we go. Let me know. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep, we see it.
Wonderful. Okay, so yeah, today I'm going to be presenting on Scrum. We'll get into kind of what the scope of what I want to cover here today and discuss, but this is very much a collaborative session, hoping to get some conversations, hoping to hear from what some other people's experiences are with Scrum or with, Dynamics 365 implementations and some of the things that we're discussing. So feel free to put your hand up or even let me know if you have any questions, or you can type them into the chat and I'll try and leave some time at the end for questions as well. So a little bit about myself. I'm Robert Bailey. I'm a functional team lead at Upzoids Canada. We do Dynamics 365 implementations primarily, and I've been working in the space for about 18 years. I started off as a developer before transitioning to functional consulting and Scrum Master. So that's me. Enough about me for now. Let's talk about what I'm going to be presenting. So, building an AI-powered Scrum team. What we're mostly going to be looking at is the three things that are on this slide, right? So, how to use Scrum as a delivery method for Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about Scrum. Obviously, I'm a Scrum advocate, and I could talk about Scrum for hours. Most people, in fact, a show of hands, how many people have not heard of Scrum, have no experience, in a Scrum project, whether it's a Dynamics 365 implementation or any kind of other Scrum project? Put up your hand if you don't know what Scrum is, basically. I don't see many hands going up. So I won't take too long like introducing what Scrum is. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about like what the benefit of it is in the scope of D365 and maybe try to convince you that it's still a worthwhile and relevant methodology for Dynamics 365 or Power Platform implementations. But then we'll start looking at the nuances of building a Scrum team within that context, within the context of D365 and Power Platform, because obviously it is a methodology that's agnostic of what you're doing, right? And then because we live in 2025 and we can't escape it, we're going to have to talk about how we can enhance it with AI, right? How do we infuse our Scrum team with AI and get more out of it? So that's what we're going to be covering. So first, what is Scrum? The most important thing to, I guess, remember when it comes to Scrum is that it is intended to be iterative, not incremental, right? So most of you have probably heard of Scrum, right? Or hybrid agile, right? Or a hybrid project, right? And in our world, this is pretty much what most Scrum projects are going to inevitably have to be. They're going to, you're going to need to have some upfront requirements, agreement, and design, and then maybe you can get into development and you break that development into sprints, and then you probably have a big bang deployment or whatever, right? So most of you have probably experienced that, and that is basically doing things in an incremental way, right? So I love this visual, which is incremental means, okay, we know exactly what we want up front, right? We have it all laid out, the entire design, but then we're going to be agile, right? We need to be agile. So we're going to like split the development into sprints. And then you have like, you fully bake one sprint at a time. Is there value in that? Yes. You only get a fraction of the potential value unless you deliberately inject iteration and feedback. But it still gives you cadence and predictability, right? And we'll get into what the Scrum, we'll have a reminder slide. Let me go to the next slide and then I'll go back, right? Where you have the loop of, you have a continuous feedback loop. So you're giving the stakeholders a chance to see what you've done so far and give feedback on it so that you can make changes early before you dig yourself too deep of a hole. Right? You get traceability via the boards, the sprint reviews, the burn downs, the retrospectives, issues surface earlier. So I'm not going to tell you, look, don't bother doing Scrum unless it's real Scrum, right? But you are getting more out of it if you work towards making your Scrum process iterative instead of incremental, right? So what that means is that you don't necessarily, you try not to have a crystal clear design for every single feature hardwired from the beginning. You might know what your end goal is, right? But you're experimenting and learning as you go. You're changing, you're open to the idea of changing direction based on the actual feedback that comes in from sprint to sprint. So each sprint is supposed to represent a shippable piece of product, basically, right? I mean, it's not going to be an entire, CRM necessarily, right? Or whatever, but it might be a feature set, and you do a sprint, get the feedback, iterate on that, improve, add more features, get more feedback, etc. Right? So that's a better fit to reality and a higher return on investment. And so that's what we want. That's how you get the most benefit out of Scrum. And I could go on an hour-long rant about all of the roadblocks that make this difficult to do. I'm sure we've all had fixed budget RFPs that we've responded to that have a fixed budget and all the requirements predetermined upfront that are based on their existing system, and they just want to lift and shift into the cloud. Well, then there's only so much you can do, but you're still getting that benefit that I mentioned of doing things in the Scrum way. So quick reminder, this is basic agnostic Scrum, right? And we're going to get into a little bit more detail, but you'll probably have some upfront design. Then you have your iterative or incremental development in the middle, which is like a mini loop, right? Where you get feedback through daily stand-ups and show and tells, play testing with the end users. That's an important part of Scrum, is it has to be collaborative with the people that are going to be receiving the product. And your sprint demos and retrospectives. Your basic Scrum roles are the Scrum Master, who kind of manages the Scrum process. Your product owner, who's usually on the client team, and they kind of are the gatekeeper of the requirements to determine, is what you are building doing the job. And then you have your Scrum team, which you can divide into your functional team. So they design and refine requirements to meet business needs. And technical team are the people who are actually building anything, configuring, coding, etc., etc. Questions so far? Probably pretty familiar territory for most people. So why is Scrum good for Dynamics 365 or Power Platform? Well, the main things about Dynamics Power Platform implementations are that and this is true. I mean, it's not only true of Dynamics 365 and Power Platform, but it in my experience is definitely true of those sorts of implementations, is that you need to maximize collaboration, right? Because the whole benefit of Scrum is that you get that feedback coming in, and then you can pivot based on that. But we all know that because of the fact that you are building to a product, to a platform, Power Platform, Dynamics 365, you're working within those constraints, right? So you don't want chaos either. So that's the reason why a structured framework is a good thing. Of course, there's a lot of different structured frameworks that you could use, some agile, some more waterfall, but having a structured framework is important. You don't want to kind of wing it. And that goes without saying, right? So it gives you that container, it allows you to work in sprints, agree on a sprint goal, and then the flip side is you get the collaboration. So it's not too structured that it's not so structured that you can't pivot, you can't adjust, you can't make changes as you go. It has that flexibility to adapt to the feedback that's coming in. And the most important thing is that it infuses your implementation with continuous improvement. That's the whole theme of Scrum, is you're always going forwards, never backwards. Things should be getting better as you go through the sprint retrospectives and through the feedback and through learning, not worse. So. And then a quick note about, again, when I'm talking about hybrid agile or Scrum but, right? In theory, a true agile project doesn't have phases, it's just agile, right? So you're just doing sprints, and some sprints are more, let's talk about requirements, and other sprints are more experimentation and playing, and other sprints are, okay, we're going to ship something. But on pretty much every Dynamics 365 project I've been on, no matter how agile it was, because I've actually been on some pretty agile ones, it was always this a little bit of a hybrid. In that upfront, you're going to do a discovery phase where you have your initial workshops, you talk about, you make sure you understand what the requirements are. And the best tool the tool that I'm going to advocate for is Azure DevOps. There's other tools that could be used, but we're talking Microsoft, we're talking Power Platform. So, you want to use the Microsoft tool. So you're using Azure DevOps to record your backlog of features and epics and user stories or product backlog items that you're going to build towards. And so you start seeding that in the discovery phase. During the validation phase, could just be considered another part of discovery, not really important. But that's where you're refining the user stories to come up with your concrete requirements, and you're drilling down in DevOps from epic to feature to backlog item. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then you have what Scrum is all about, which is the iterative build phase, where you're doing that loop from sprint to sprint. You're infusing testing throughout the iterative build process. That's very important. And we can talk a little bit more about QA today. But I also have an entire presentation that I'm going to be doing another time about QA best practices in Dynamics 365 and how to infuse AI into those QA best practices. So you can stay tuned for that in the future. But the point is that after your iterative build, if you're going to be doing a big bang deployment, or maybe per release, you're doing probably a full test phase, right? This is where you would do your regression testing, your performance testing, full iteration or integration testing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a more comprehensive test than the sort of requirement by requirement testing that you're doing throughout the Scrum process as a whole. And then whether it's per release or whether you're doing a big bang deployment or go live, there's normally going to be a dedicated deployment phase at the end. So with that in mind, let's talk about how to build a team for each of these phases, and who's doing what and how to use AI, which I'm sure is probably the thing that people are most interested in. But just so that we're all kind of aligned. So building a Scrum team, you've got your standard Scrum roles. So Scrum Master, Product Owner, and developers, or the people who are building the thing, right? When it comes to Power Platform or Dynamics 365 specifically, we can actually make these roles a little bit more specific. Because when you're learning Scrum, when you're reading about Scrum, it's very agnostic to what you're doing. You can use Scrum for anything, right? Not even just software development. But there are some roles when you're on a software development project that you're normally going to see, which would include your business analysts, your solution architect, your QA lead, and your user experience designers. I don't know if I'll get into a little bit more detail, but they're probably pretty self-evident. When it comes to Dynamics 365 and Power Platform specifically, roles would include the Dynamics 365 functional consultant, who is somebody who really understands the Dynamics 365 capabilities, the sales, the customer service, the field service modules really, really well, and is able to do that fit gap analysis so that you are leveraging out of the box capabilities as much as possible. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're using low-no code wherever possible, and only for the things that you can't use low-no code do you bring the developers in to write custom code. So that's what the D365 functional consultant is primarily for. On a lot of projects that I've been on, the business analyst and the Dynamics 365 functional consultant are the same person. Maybe some of you have experienced that before, but in theory, they are separate roles. They might be the same person, but they're separate roles. Power Platform technical consultant is a developer, essentially, but somebody who is particularly familiar with Power Platform and has an emphasis on maximizing low-no code, right? So utilizing Power Automate as much as possible, utilizing PCF controls for model-driven apps, and only resorting to like real coding when absolutely necessary. If somebody doesn't have that strong background in Power Platform, they're going to jump to like hacking it with code in situations where they shouldn't be. So this is why it's important to have those people on the team. You might have dedicated business analysts or dedicated developers on the team as well if you're talking about a big team, and it would be up to the solution architect or the Scrum Master or some combination of those two people to kind of decide, you know, how to divide the labor up. And then depending on the situation, you might also have data analysts, right? People who are good at putting together Power BI reports, people who are good at determining, you know, what sort of data analytic capabilities the client would benefit from. And this is something that really falls through the cracks in my experience on projects. I find very, very often, even clients, when they have a crystal clear concept of what they want the system to do, they're always like, yeah, and we need reporting too, you know, like it's not clear, like the reporting requirements are never clear out of the gate. So having somebody who's really good at that is a huge benefit to a team for Power Platform implementation. And then nowadays, I recommend always having an AI specialist. I haven't seen this happen on too many projects that I've been on yet, but I predict that there will be people, I mean, really everybody is going to be leveraging AI. Like all of these roles will be leveraging AI for sure. AI is going to be infused in every single one of these work streams, but you also need people who really specialize in AI, right? For your projects, people who specialize in AI governance, people who specialize in custom AI capabilities, people who specialize in training AI, people who specialize in building AI, depending on the situation. So that's a new emerging set of skills. And maybe that's even more than one role, depending on the project. But that's what a team for the Power Platform looks like. I'm wondering, based on people's past experience, and given we're talking about Power Platform or Dynamics 365, if anyone else has seen any other roles that are maybe missing from this slide. How many people mostly do, actually quick show of hands, how many people are implementers? You mostly do implementations versus users of Dynamics. Only a few people. Oh, so most of you are actually users then? Cool. So hopefully you're still learning something. Maybe I'd be interested in if you type in the chat whether in your experience you've seen on projects a business analyst and a functional consultant being the same person or two different people. You can just type that in the chat, and maybe at the end of the call we'll take a look at what that result is, because I'm interested to know what the norm is. As far as Microsoft is concerned, they are different people. So we've talked about this, right? Product owner responsible for defining and prioritizing the product backlog. Scrum Master, make sure the Scrum process is going well. The Scrum team actually does it. When it comes to the Scrum team, your Power Platform solution architect, that's somebody who kind of knows all the technical stuff that they need to know to plan the overall solution. Business analysts, they're focused on business requirements, right? Agnostic to Power Platform if they're a dedicated BA. 365 functional consultant, already talked about it. Technical consultant, already talked about it. I mentioned data analyst, UX designer, AI specialist. Another one that I forgot to put on the other slide is web developer, right? So if there's a portal, right, or a website is involved, you're going to want a web developer. Probably goes without saying, but not all developers are web developers. So. Okay, so how does AI impact this? I do see a hand up, so if you want to ask a question, lower the hand and then raise it again, so I know that you didn't just raise it and forgot to put it down. So AI, we all know what AI is at this point. Actually, I put this slide deck together some time ago, and at the time it was worth mentioning what AI is, and it's not worth mentioning what it is anymore. So I'll skip that. But AI can help the Scrum phase by basically just powering up all of the things that all the activities you're going to be doing already. You're going to be able to do them more quickly and efficiently and better using AI, and just deliver a higher quality of work. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to be focused on Microsoft's AI offerings today. So first and foremost among that, of course, is Copilot. That's the large language model based generative AI. There's an AI assistant for virtually every Microsoft app. You see Copilot all over the place. So no matter what Microsoft app you open up, Copilot is there to kind of help you out. And the quality of it varies from app to app. So that's the embedded Copilot. And then there's basically like ChatGPT, but in Microsoft, which is like the general Copilot, or Windows Copilot, or Microsoft 365 Copilot. There's also an extremely useful embedded Copilot inside GitHub or Visual Studio, GitHub Copilot. And it's very, very powerful as well. So how useful your Copilot, is depends a little bit on the context. But we all, I think, have seen how capable the general like M365 Copilot is, and the GitHub Copilot. If you haven't seen it, it can do some pretty amazing stuff within Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. Beyond Copilot, there are some other AI capabilities to consider that could also be leveraged to improve Scrum. So there's the Azure AI platform, Azure OpenAI service, your machine learning service, and cognitive services. And those have different capabilities built into them, which can infuse more of that analytics side of AI. Now, Copilot kind of has that as well. Like I think like, for example, there's the analyst agent, and you can feed it large amounts of data, and then it can do some analysis on that data. But ways to kind of make that more procedural and planned out in advance and less random is to use, just to set it up specifically using like AI models that you set up in Azure. And so I'll talk a little bit about a little bit of the art of the possible later, and hopefully no like AI experts on the call like call me out, because they're mostly ideas for some things, right? And I'm hoping that other people can share ideas as well when it comes to the different phases and how we can infuse AI into them. There are some other powerful tools. Power Platform AI Builder. That's basically your sort of point and click or verbal, prompt within Power Platform, and it can like build an app for you. Most of us have probably played with that. Malcolm, for example, who's frequently on these calls, he's like a big advocate of doing things that way. And that it's really good because you can basically create a proof of concept in like a super quick amount of time by describing to Power Platform like what it is that you want, and it'll put a basic app together for you. And it'll be held together by like mystery glue and stuff. Like it's not a real, it's not at the point where it's a real app. Like you want to build it properly from the ground up afterwards. But for putting proofs of concept, like functional proofs of concept together, it's a great tool. So, and then there are AI models within the different CRM apps as well. And so you want to be aware of those AI offerings so that you can make sure that whatever you're building in Dynamics 365 for your clients, you're leveraging those pieces. And actually, I'm still finding today that some of the biggest wow factor, like when demoing, say, Dynamics 365 Contact Center or Dynamics 365 Customer Service or whatever the case may be, some of the biggest like wow factor is still in just how good some of these AI capabilities are in app. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what those are. Okay, so let's bring it all together. I have a lot of slides that I'm going to go through quick because I don't want to take all day kind of explaining Scrum. I want to focus on Dynamics 365, the team that you're putting together, and how to enhance it with AI. So I'm not going to take too long explaining each individual thing, but we'll go phase by phase. And actually, I had little inserts that like highlighted which of the phases I was on, and I forgot to put them in this. I like updated my slide deck with a new template, basically. So these are the 5 phases: discovery, validation, build, test, deploy. And then what I had was a slide that circles it, and I just forgot to put it in. So right now we're on discovery, okay? So we're gonna go phase by phase. So discovery. Again, we're doing workshop sessions, right? That's when we collaborate with stakeholders to understand pain points and key project objectives. We build our backlog using Azure DevOps, epics, features, user stories. We prioritize our backlog in this phase, but again, it's at a high level. And we put together high level estimates, do a sanity check on what we've kind of agreed to do. Best practices, setting AI aside, is to engage cross-functional teams, ask the why. I could go on a 20-minute rant about this seemingly obvious thing. Is you want to know why. Why do you need it to work this way? Why do you want this? Because often, if the client is open to the idea of iterative and agile, the why will often change what they're asking for when they realize that the reason behind what they're asking, you know, they don't need it to be built exactly the way that they're imagining, right? So we'll leave it at that, but happy to talk about that one. Prioritize transparency and document and review immediately. So we use Azure DevOps, and the QA session that I mentioned is all about testing utilizing Azure DevOps. So I could also talk for a long time about DevOps, but we use DevOps for both source control and also requirements. So we're focused on the requirements part here, right? How do we organize our items? We write requirements in the form of product backlog items or user stories. They are actionable items that represent individual requirements that a developer would actually kind of build. And the idea is that it's buildable within a sprint. They are kind of bucketed into features, which are like functional areas, normally scoped to a release. And then those would be organized under epics, which are like your broad categories of functionality. So during the discovery, the product owner is busy. They are identifying responsibilities, SMEs during the workshops, making sure that all the requirements that ought to bubble up to the surface are bubbling up, and they're responsible for the backlog that comes out of it at the end of the day. The Scrum Master may or may not be involved. They probably are, because they're probably wearing multiple hats, but this isn't where they're shining. Business Analyst is leading the workshops, of course, and documenting the requirements. The functional consultant is taking those requirements and translating them into a format that developers can understand. And they are the ones who are kind of doing the busy, heavy lifting of building the backlog. And then the solution architect is focused on the technical constraints that are falling out of those requirements. Okay, questions on who is doing what? Okay. So this is where the open-ended nature of this presentation hopefully is coming into play. Everyone's gone off camera, so I'm assuming most of you are multitasking or have left the room, but this is your chance to talk. So my ideas, and some actually the one I'm going to get to something that I've actually tried here, and some actually pretty much all of these I'm already doing. The last time I did this presentation, I'm like, I haven't tried this one yet. I haven't tried that one yet, but these ones, this is what I try to do. So probably the most obvious one is to utilize meeting summaries and sentiment analysis using your team's AI transcripts and your AI facilitator bot and the AI notes and summaries, right? If you turn it on in Teams, then you have it. That's all you need to do, right? And then you just need to use it. The benefit of no longer really needing dedicated note takers is just absolutely tremendous. And then from that, you can, the biggest thing is the sentiment analysis, right? You can do an analysis of what are some of the hot topics that kind of make people in the room kind of upset when it's mentioned, because you really, during discovery, that's when you get the chance to talk about the client's pain points, right? And sometimes something is a pain point for people when but it hasn't necessarily been documented up until that point. And this can help you to discover that. And obviously a good BA, you know, they can pick up on these things, but you got a lot on your plate. So being able to go back and identify like what those things are using sentiment analysis is like huge. So that's a no-brainer. A lot of people might be doing that already. But you can also leverage Copilot to help you bucket those meeting summaries and those meeting notes into functional groupings that you can then later use to actually basically populate your backlog, an initial backlog at a high level, right? So you can use Copilot for that. Another thing, one thing that I'd like to point out that I tend to do is the meeting summaries that Teams generates are great, like quick recaps, quick notes. But often what I'll want to do is I'll want to download the transcript itself and then actually feed that into M365 Copilot, and then give it a prompt so that it'll comb through that transcript to pick up on specific things. So the three things, like I said, like pick up on are, like I said, the sentiment analysis, right? The hot topics, functional groupings, right? And then of course, like making sure that all the to-dos and next actions are clear. Although the AI note taker that comes out of the box in Teams is pretty good at that last one. So any other ideas from anyone on specifically in discovery using AI, or anything that you've done in your experience? Have you guys all, are you guys all doing this already? Show of hands, how many people use the AI notes in virtually every meeting at this point? Good number of people. Anyone who's not doing it, my suggestion is to do it. Some organizations have a policy where you can't turn it on, so you know, I don't know. Okay, next phase is validation. For some people, this is just the part 2 of discovery, right? But this is where we refine the backlog. We make sure that we actually have requirement by requirement, PBI by PBI, and where we really finalize the fit gap of matching for each requirement, right? Is it going to be an out-of-the-box capability that we're going to leverage? Maybe the client is willing to stop doing things exactly the way that they're doing and do it the Dynamics out-of-the-box way instead. Maybe, you know, that's optimistic, but it can happen. Or are we going to use config, low-no code? Or are we going to use, you know, custom development, right? And then we might summarize all this together and put a solution blueprint together, especially important if there's things like integrations, multiple systems talking to each other, and so on and so forth, right? This is also when the UX design activities really pick up, where we want to be thinking about our data migration strategy, integration strategy, and so on. So the product owner is helping with that refinement, prioritizing, reprioritizing, clarifying requirements, providing approvals. The Scrum Master is helping to set up DevOps for the iterative build. So they're setting up the sprints, they're setting up team capacity, they're setting up reports and analytics in DevOps, very important. Even to this day, like when you're on a project, that's one of the things that usually gets left behind is like the sprint by sprint analytics and reporting. But you really want that. That's an important part of how to make Scrum better. Business analyst supports the functional consultant. Functional consultant is documenting the requirements, hopefully with the help of AI at this point. Solution architect is building the solution blueprint. Okay, so that's who's doing what. Hopefully everyone, hopefully that makes sense for everyone. So how can we use AI? So I have a few ideas that I'll present, and I'm hoping people can offer a few more. So one would be architectural drafts. There's various tools you can do for this. One tool that I've seen used is GitHub Copilot, but actually there's probably like a bunch of other tools we could name, but I'm trying to focus just on Microsoft tools. Microsoft AI, that was my challenge, only Microsoft AI. But you could utilize GitHub Copilot to streamline creation of solution design documents, right? So this is if you're the solution architect, you need to put together those architectural documents up front, often for clients. What's your integration approach going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So you can actually put some pretty solid upfront documentation together with the help of GitHub Copilot. And it'll format it in such a way that then that serves as an extension point for future development as well. It's all baked into Visual Studio. And then I actually already mentioned this one, but a really powerful tool is during this phase, this is when you might be doing things like proof of concepts or prototyping. And I could do a whole presentation on prototyping and the benefit of prototyping. But before you start your formal development, it's great to put something together that people can see and touch and that is real, right? So that's where using Power App, it used to be called Power Apps Ideas. They've probably renamed it, but then it's the Copilot in Power Apps where it says, what type of app do you want to build, right? And then you go in and you type and you say, put together an app where I can do this, that, or the other thing, and it'll build the tables for you. It'll build a quick model-driven app or Canvas app for you. And again, it's behind the scenes, not necessarily very well structured, but it serves the purpose of demonstrating what it is that you're trying to do. So that's a very powerful design tool. And the QR codes here are, so if you want to view documentation on some of these ideas, I put that there. Now, this is a big one that I talk more about in that other presentation that I mentioned where I'm actually do a demo. So if you want to see a demo, you know, sometime in the next few months, Diane, I'll do another presentation where I'll show a demo of this first one here. But this is really cool, which is your automated backlog construction, right? So you can utilize GitHub Copilot in Visual Studio Code. You can feed in those functional areas that I mentioned earlier that you use Windows Copilot to describe the requirements, right? And then you can feed those in to GitHub Copilot, and then GitHub Copilot can put it into like MD or CSV format of actual PBIs organized into epics and features. That's not your final backlog, because of course we know that you have to manually check all of AI's everything. There's always a chance of like hallucinations or whatever, but it saves a ton of time. Like you can cut down on your initial just like building the backlog, building the stub PBIs, clicking new PBI, click, 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 right? It cuts down on that by like 40 to 60%. And then the job of the functional consultant is just to do the sanity check on it, right? You have to do that sanity check, but it's very powerful. So, and then I think I mentioned on a later slide, on the testing slide, the fact that you can create test cases for all of these PBIs as well. So I'll get to that later. So that's a powerful one. And then another one that I haven't actually tried this, but an idea that I've had is that you could build a machine learning model in Azure Machine Learning. So this is one I'm playing with right now. So no demo for this one yet. But you can use machine learning to actually analyze backlog items in DevOps. So that would be most useful on like a longer term Scrum project where maybe you have multiple projects in the same DevOps instance, and then it can learn over time the types of features that get prioritized or that take longer to build or whatever. So it basically looks at trends in your Scrum process to help you prioritize things that maybe are going to take longer, improve your estimates, based on the sentiment analysis, what people want to see, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an interesting one. Other ideas from anyone? Amy has her hand up. I don't know, like maybe just didn't put it down before. Do you have any other ideas? Maybe just forgotten to put your hand down. Does anyone have any ideas? If you do, if something comes up, drop it into the chat if you're just shy or whatever. But each phase, I think there's an opportunity. Okay, this is obviously the meat of Scrum, so I'm going to try and keep it brief. Do I have until 2 or 2:15? I forget, Diane.
2:15 will work anytime in between there.
Oh,
I think
okay.
we have it booked.
I'll try and pick it up a little bit here.
Yeah, no, we have it booked till 2:30, I think. So
Okay.
you have some time.
I want to leave time for like talking and questions and stuff. Okay. So the iterative building or the development phase, right? This is where we configure and development, using hopefully configuration and low-no code as much as possible. Although low-no code is dead now, but custom code when needed, right? Very important to this is solid acceptance criteria, right? So if you don't have solid acceptance criteria, what is actually going to be built, what is actually going to be tested, it all falls apart. So any improvements we're making to this process, I find, are primarily going to center around that, around making sure that our acceptance criteria is correct and that our definition of done is correct and accurate, so that developers know what to build and testers know what to test. So we're continuing to refine our backlog groom. I still say backlog grooming. I'm getting older. You're not supposed to call it that anymore. Backlog refinement. You're doing those feedback and adjustments throughout the process. And then you're utilizing the Scrum framework. This is where Scrum really becomes Scrum, right? To do your iterative sprints. So you have a sprint, which is going to be 2 or 3 week cycle. Normally 2 or 3 weeks. Some people do 1 week sprints, but you can't make 1 week sprints unless it's truly agile. So we're talking hybrid agile, so it'll never be 1 week. So 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe 4 even. You have your daily stand-ups, right? 15-minute meeting, goes around the table. These usually fall apart and become a disaster that wastes everybody's time. That won't happen if you make sure that it's just, what did you do yesterday? What did you get done? What are you going to be doing today? And are there any blockers? Oh, you do have a blocker? Okay, we'll discuss it later, right? You don't discuss the blockers. It's just, do you have any blockers? Unless it's like a question that you can answer in like 10 seconds, right? Anyway, rant over. You do regular backlog grooming sessions to refine the backlog. Probably you're going to want 1 or 2 of those a week. At the beginning of the sprint, you plan it. So your sprint planning is an important ceremony. And there's different approaches. I've seen it done where a lot of it happens before the main meeting. And then the main meeting is, you're trying to be as efficient as possible. I've seen the people advocate for the opposite, where you want an entire day dedicated to the sprint planning. And you're all in a room and it's very, very collaborative. And I've seen both work. So really depends. At the end, it's important for you to do a sprint review and to demo what's seen. And then it's also very important to do a retrospective, which is a reflective meeting where you all discuss what worked, what didn't, and what sort of improvements you can make. And if you're not, again, if you're not making improvements from sprint to sprint, then you're not really doing Scrum. Okay, this is one of my favorite visuals. I always have to include it in every Scrum deck I've done, which is Scrum and DevOps. This is probably getting old by this point, but it does point out the main pieces to consider when you're doing Scrum in DevOps, right? You've got your sprint planning, right? Some of the best practices there: infrastructure as code, continuous integration, automated testing, continuous and automated deployment, You want to decouple deployments from your release. You want to do things like extreme programming. You want to have a programming methodology as well. I'm not really talking about development for developers here today, but development for developers. You want to amplify as you go, right? So it's important to be doing code review, peer programming, right? Extreme programming, whatever, right? You want developers to manage their own items. You want ownership of product backlog items by developers. You want dashboards and visibility and transparency. And then finally, you want to keep that spirit of learning and experimentation going, because again, a lot of the benefit of Scrum comes from that, right? So it has to be psychologically safe to fail. You have to have those retrospectives be safe spaces, and you want to reserve slack time. One extension I just wanted to point out in DevOps is the retrospectives tool. I don't think it's turned on by default, but it lets you have really effective retrospectives in DevOps. Okay, so I think we know who's doing what, right? Developers are developing, functionals are supporting them. So AI in build. Here are some of the ideas that I've put together. I mentioned one of them already, which is that you can use your machine model to do effort estimation. But related to that is this is one that I intend to see if I can make work on a bigger project. I've been on a lot of smaller projects, more effort than it's worth probably. But I think it's the kind of thing where if you set it up once, it'll just work after that, which is your predictive sprint capacity modeling. You could leverage Power BI dashboards connected to DevOps analytics to visualize team capacity better than the out-of-the-box dashboards in DevOps. And if you utilize Azure Machine Learning, it can predict team capacity and velocity on a sprint-to-sprint basis. So that's one way to kind of get your Scrum process being more efficient. There's really no point in worrying about this if you're not leveraging like dashboards and analytics to analyze your team velocity and then actually act on that from sprint to sprint. So I've seen so many projects where that wasn't happening, where it's like 80% of the benefit comes from the fact that you care about like, okay, this is how the sprint burnt down. We got stuck here, we got plateaued here, what happened? And doing that analysis. If you're not doing that, don't worry about infusing AI into it, because the AI is not going to help. And then when it comes to your daily task summaries and retrospectives, it's kind of the same thing that I was mentioning with the team meetings, right? Like in Discovery, right? You're using AI to help summarize what's coming out of those stand-ups or out of those retrospectives, to do sentiment analysis on it and to identify, to help you catch things that you might not have noticed otherwise. If anyone has any more ideas, you can type them into the chat. Okay, testing in Scrum. Iteration by iteration, we want to be doing testing throughout, right? So there is testing baked into Scrum, but usually we have a dedicated test phase where you're doing regression testing, you're doing systems integration testing, right? And then obviously user acceptance tests, right? That's when the full scope of end users, which is normally bigger than the scope that's of the team who's involved throughout the Scrum process, gets involved to do that big bang testing at the end, right? End-to-end testing. So for this, you're going to want to set up test plans in DevOps, test plans, test suites, test cases, at least one test case per PBI, et cetera, et cetera. I could talk about this for a while. In fact, I do in the other presentation I mentioned, so I'll keep this brief. But best practices are you want test cases to be linked to PBIs for traceability. You want to automate as much as possible, and AI can help with that, and I'll talk about that a little bit, which is you want to automate repetitive tests using tools like Playwright, Test Engine. I don't know how many people have used those tools, but you should never be executing the same test case more than once, basically, right? You automate a test, you run a test case during Scrum, then you write an automated test script for it. And then when you get to your regression testing, you run that script, right? And the user acceptance test is going to be a little bit different, obviously, because you want people playing around and trying to break it. But if you're doing regression testing each release, it should be automated. If it's not automated, you're just wasting your time, basically. And you want to continuously refine those test cases during sprints. Okay, let's kind of skip this part, sort of obvious. So I mentioned earlier the automated test, the automated PBI generation. You can do the same for test cases as well, right? So based on your backlog, based on the product backlog items, you can have, you can leverage GitHub Copilot to create test cases for you and then import them into DevOps in an automated way. And then I guess I don't mention it on the slide, but to take it one step further, you can then have it, you can basically take those test cases that it creates, record them in Playwright, and then have them executed automatically when you run your pipelines, when you're doing your deployments, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave that for today. And then finally, you have your deployment. And I didn't really have any ideas for how AI can help with deployment, but Scrum is good for deployment too, because it promotes continuous integration through sprints, so that by the time you get to that dedicated deployment phase, it ensures the final release is fully production ready. Okay, so at this point, most of the team is winding down. You still have your product owner, who's that final gatekeeper. You have your Scrum Master, who may or may not be involved at that point. Your functional consultant, again, is doing that final sanity check. And the solution architect is the one who's kind of taking key responsibility for the deployment itself, making sure that all the pipelines are set up, making sure that data migration activities are complete, troubleshooting any system level issues that arise during the deployment, etc. Okay. Okay, so I don't want to keep people here all day. I'll end it there. I just wanted to present some ideas that hopefully people are willing to try out if you're doing Scrum, or some of these ideas are not only for Scrum. Like I mentioned, a lot of things that are not necessarily Scrum specific, but it would be how you could enhance your Scrum process. So hopefully that was helpful for people. And yeah, if there's any questions, you can turn it over. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat or not.
I don't see any questions in the chat. Lots of comments thanking you for the good presentation and all the information. So thank you, Robert. Lots to think about there. Definitely lots I'm going to take back, and things I didn't consider as far as the way that we can incorporate AI into just the day-to-day things that we're doing. So lots to uncover, and I look forward to part 2 of the presentations. We'll make a plan and get that scheduled out. So unless there's any last minute questions, anyone have anything they want to ask Robert before we end for today?
Hey, Robert, I'll ask one quick question. So great presentation. That's food for thought for a lot of stuff that we're doing on our side here. You may have mentioned this, sorry, I was sort of in and out of the presentation, so I apologize if you've mentioned this, but have you used AI to help you more on the development side with building out your pipelines and your build and release pipelines in specifically Azure DevOps? And what kind of success have you had with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. That's yeah, that's less my wheelhouse. I think we have to a certain degree. Maybe I'm going to try hard, Diane. There's a couple of people that I would direct that question to, and I'd see if we can maybe come and get them to present. But like the biggest takeaway is like with the vibe programming thing is it extends to almost anything. In that when you're doing your pipeline setup, right? I know that there's ways, I don't know offhand, I haven't done it myself, that you can leverage AI to like assist in setting up those pipelines in an efficient way. But I'm not necessarily the best person who can say that I have personal experience with that. But yeah, there are ways that you can leverage AI when you're setting up those pipelines. Now, like I said, one of the elements that I'm hoping to incorporate into a future presentation that I'm experimenting with is triggering automated testing that has been set up in Test Engine or Playwright as part of doing a deployment leveraging pipelines. So the pipeline itself will actually trigger the automated testing, and then it all gets recorded against the test cases and PPIs in DevOps through the pipeline. So stay tuned for that. I haven't completed that. I haven't completed that yet, but I'm working on it, and I'm pretty excited about it. So,
so stay tuned. Cool. Yeah, we're sort of in that scenario where we're trying to see how we can build a repeatable setup process end to end for our DevOps and our projects. So that's why this was sort of an interest to me, that I see a lot of things we can do on the management of it. So I was just curious as to, what you've done on the setup side. So we have that idea as well for using Playwright, but that's sort of like a phase 4 or 5 for us because we're still in our infancy with this. But anyway, great presentation. Yeah, thanks for the feedback. So.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, that's a good conversation. Great presentation, Robert. Thank you again for your time, and have a wonderful day, everyone. We'll see you next month.